Good evening, everybody. Today is 19th September, and I hope you'll allow me to remind you that some time back, on 9th September, the year is 1949, the most important debate in the history of our culture, I will not say civilization, took place in the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly was working from 1946 till November 1949, and the draft of the Constitution was almost ready for the country to see on 26 November 49, so about 2 months before that. A elected member from Bengal, Lakshmikant Maitra, put up an amendment to the Constitution. And that amendment was that Sanskrit be included in the Constitution as the national language of India. He made a very impassioned speech in defense of his amendment. As he was speaking, one of the members of the Constituent Assembly said, "Yes, Honorable Sir, your speech is very impressive, but why don't you give that speech in Sanskrit?" Like you laugh, everybody laughed. He said, no, don't worry, I know Sanskrit, but you don't know. That's how we manage the situation. Nobody in the Constituent Assembly accepted his suggestion. Sanskrit was not made the national language of India. However, it was given a concession, and it was put in the 8th schedule of the Constitution, which at that time had 14 languages. Of the 14 languages, 13 were languages that were alive and being spoken, and one was not being spoken even by the person who was defending it in the Constituent Assembly. In the background of the Constituent Assembly debate was a report by the census officer of 1931, J.H. Hutton. As you know, the 1931 census was the most thorough of the censuses we have had so far. We are now talking about the caste census in the country, and you know that it was only 1931 that caste census was done, and not after that. It was perhaps a model of a census for the rest of the world. And Hutton had done a fantastic job. Hutton wrote in the introduction to that census that all through this census, in the entire country, he found nobody who could speak Sanskrit. So the name of the language does not appear among the languages being spoken in the country in 1931. Just a few years earlier, 5 years to be precise, 1926, is the time when George Grierson had completed his linguistic survey of India. I mean, this man had spent from 1898 to 1926 working on as many languages as possible. And in Grierson's survey, there were 189 languages listed, with 544 other language forms, which he called dialects. 189 languages and 544 dialects. Read the list of the names, and you do not find the name of Sanskrit. This was towards the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, all through the first half of the 20th century. A language which arrived in this country 1400 years before Christ and continued to thrive and shine and dominate and pervade every form of culture in this country till about at least till the end of the 10th century. That's roughly 2400 years, 1400 years before, that is 2400 years before our time, 3400 years before our time, till about 1000 years before our time. For 2500 years, a language dominates all forms of culture, and then it disappears. Says something not just about the language that disappeared, but also about the people who existed in India at that time and continue to exist beyond that time. Now, let me add, when I say it disappeared in the 10th century, it is not as if no Sanskrit texts were written after that. They indeed were written. In fact, all through the 11th century and the 12th century, the last great name in the line of Sanskrit was Abhinavagupta, but who was among the wisest of our ancestors, I should say. He was not just a philosopher, but a good writer, a poet, a linguist, a thinker, and a good sadhak. When Abhinavagupta died, it is said, he was in Kashmir, it is said that almost 1,000 of his followers, he entered a cave and then ended his life. Almost 1,000 followers followed him. They must be speakers of Sanskrit, surely. All through the 11th century and the 12th century, scholars did bring together Sanskrit poems. They formed compendiums, anthologies, sangrahas, kavya sangrahas. Also beyond that, someone like Jagannath Pandit kept writing. In fact, one of the Sanskrit scholars in Shah Jahan's court, when Asaf Khan died, Shah Jahan's relative, wrote a very beautiful, moving elegy called Asaf Vilas in Sanskrit. That happened. But there are other languages that were coming up. And from where did they come? I mean, I can tell you the range of languages that came up. It was Assamese and Bangla. It was Kashmiri and Punjabi a little later. It was Gujarati. It was Marathi. It was Odia. So many languages came up and occupied the cultural space, not just the geographical space, the cultural space that Sanskrit was occupying prior to that time. So here is a language that I use the term hegemony, and hegemony, I also mentioned that that term was drawn on the prison books of Gramsci, prison notebooks of Gramsci. And Gramsci defines hegemony as imposition of a cultural thought or cultural form on a multicultural society. It is not just any imposition, but on a multicultural society, imposition of culture is described as cultural hegemony. It is not as if these what were called prakruts or some were called apabhranshas. It's not as if apabhranshas and prakruts and others surface all of a sudden. They were actually trying to put up a resistance even during the times when Sanskrit was strong and active culturally. But there are other types of resistance, and let me briefly go through that. Around I mentioned yesterday when Yasaka, I had come to say 7th century prior to Christ, that is 2700 years before our time, the Vedas were put together in a systematic way. About the same time, a different kind of approach to nature, God's divinity, the society, and the self was emerging. Humans are trapped in these four relationships. One relates to some idea of divinity, some idea of what the cosmos is, what the world is like, nature, call it nature, society, people and other animals surrounding one, and oneself. The approach that the Vedas had proposed was of one kind. The approach that came up around 3600 years before our time, 6th century before Christ, which challenged the Vedic approach, was different. The name of that approach is Buddhism. Please, let's not forget that whenever Buddha opened his mouth and spoke, despite knowing Sanskrit quite well, he spoke in some other language. It's in the people's languages that he spoke. Buddha and Mahavir Jain, they fall apart with a gap of about 80 years, 70 or 80 years. Both the Jainists, Mahavir's followers, and the Buddhists were hounded out of their areas. Particularly the Jains had to move from Bihar area to Western India, Rajasthan and Gujarat. And there, they thought 300 years after Mahavir's life, nearly 3 centuries after Mahavir's life, they thought we must write down everything we have heard about Mahavir, everything he said, everything he taught us. The Jains had taken a different view of time and a different view of space. I will not get into the philosophy of time and philosophy of space, but it's remarkably different from the Vedic attitude to time and space. The Vedic philosophy denied existence of space. It made space a metaphor. The Jains accepted it as material reality. They were realistic in that sense. But 300 years after Mahavir's life, when the Jains decided to sit down and write, they chose a way of writing which was distinctly different from the way that the first Upanishad was showing, Brihad Aranyak. When the Buddhists sat down to write about what Buddha had said, many of his sermons, they chose a language which later got the name Pali, not Sanskrit. Not Sanskrit. Actually, the ones who are opposing Vedic philosophy or suggesting an alternate philosophy should have spoken the language of the Vedas, but they chose a different language. And this shows the kind of tussle, cultural tussle, which throws a lot of light on the nature of this hegemony. This happened again. This was one way of challenging the hegemony, because here were hordes of people who would come, nomads, who had wedded themselves with sedentary life of villages and occupied space as chanters of mantras who had magical powers. The mantras had magical powers, and the chanters, like the pharaohs of the Egyptian pharaohs. You heard of this. In Egypt, there used to be the temple. But what God said could not be understood by anybody except the pharaoh. So the people went to the temple not to look at the god or bow down the goddess, but to listen to the pharaoh, ask for the interpretation. It was the interpreter Raj in Egypt. The term Purohit is not very distinct in sound from the term pharaoh, but the idea was the same. The idea was same. Here is an interpreter, who decides what is sacred and what is sacrilege. I was discussing this outside with one of our friends here. The Buddha and the Jain way of looking at it was different. Buddha did not want ashramas and varnas. Buddha proposed Sangha. The Vedic philosophy, because of the rule of the interpreters, the Purohits, those who could sing the richas, those who could perform the yajnas, those who could get blessings, invite blessings on the audiences, uh, because they knew a certain language and texts in an oral tradition which had till then not been written down, not accessible to anybody. Uh, a strange kind of aura was created around this. People feared the Vedas as well as they respected the Vedas. They respected and they feared the Vedas as we respect and fear an authority. This was the hegemony. To challenge it and the social order that this kind of fear had created, the Vedic fear had created a social order of those who had access to the Vedas, the others who supported those who had access to the Vedas, yet others who were in the supply line, and yet others who had nothing to do with these people. Four varnas were created. The varna and the ashram system was challenged by Buddhism. That was the first challenge that came to the hegemony of which the Sanskrit language had become. Language by itself cannot become hegemony, but language can become vehicle of hegemony. This was not a political power. The Vedic scholar, the Vedic rishis did not become rulers, but they became more than the rulers. No ruler could ever become a ruler unless he had, very rarely she had blessings of these people. Challenge was put up, first challenge to hegemony was put up by Buddha. The second challenge was even more imaginative in my opinion. And it is thus. The Vedas were in oral tradition. And while after the Buddhists and the Jain scholars started writing down in the 3rd century, script had become available. All the Vedic scholars also started writing their own books, fearing that if they did not write, then the Buddhists and the Jains might actually walk into the ring and occupy the space. So this was a strange situation that if you look at the dates of most of the Shastras, most of the theoretical books in Sanskrit, you find that they are written in 4th century before Christ, 3rd century before Christ, 2nd century before Christ, or maybe 2 centuries after Christ. It is that about 2400 years before us to 1800 years before us, 500-600 years, they piled up literature on literature, text on text, theory on even darshana, even the earliest forms of the philosophies. They come there. But all these philosophies emerging out of Vedic tradition said that for logical veracity, for logical verification of your statement, the ultimate authority is not like what the Greeks had said, logical consistency. They said, for veracity of anything you say, the ultimate test is whether the Vedas have said that or not. Look at all the 6 darshanas. We say 6 schools of philosophy, but at least three of those depend entirely on the consent of the Vedas, and the remaining 3 depend on the method of the Vedas. I'll not get into that nitty-gritty at the moment, but I want to speak about a second challenge that came to the hegemony of Sanskrit. And it is at this time, 3rd century before Christ, 2400 years before our time, when Sanskrit started getting written, and the Shastras made the people who knew the Shastras Shastris. There were 2 standards prevalent in the society. One is the oral tradition, those who recite the Vedic Pathshala. The other is the Shastras, those who actually write. At that time, an ancient, for those times, what was ancient what was older. Folklore, story was snatched out of the past. The name of that story was Jaya Itihas. This Jaya Itihas was something which was composed as a kind of a ballad, a popular or a folk ballad, story of heroism, describing a period of about 7 centuries. That is, from the 14th century, when Sanskrit arrived here, the nomadic people were bringing their horses, they were bringing the grass, the durvas, the kusha grass from the Eurasian steppes. They had that method here for performing yajnas. 1400 before Christ, that's 3,500 years, 400 years before our time, till 2,700 years before our time. Those 700 years, whatever was remembered of the ancestors, whatever was remembered of the clash between the previously established villages and these nomadic groups. How many cows were stolen from which village, which war happened, how many horses were let loose to defeat those cow keepers, all that was written in that Jai Itihasa. It had description of a war or a battle between a set of brothers and another set of brothers. That text was brought forward to 2nd century, and earlier it had only about 8,000, perhaps 24,000 lines. Now it was turned into 1 lakh verses. The name of that text is Mahabharata. I am saying 8,000 because there were 3 stories going around. When the first time it is recited, the Mahabharata's first book actually talks about it. First recitation instance is described in the Mahabharata in the opening book, Adi Parva. And it says, Ashtadasha sahasrani ashtadasha satani cha aham veti shuko veti sanjaya veti vanva. There's a wanderer who comes into an ashram and he tells a story to children. The children say, no, it's a lovely story, say it again. But he says, I know only 8,000 lines. Shuka knows another 8,000. And Sanjay is associated with horses. He perhaps knows other 8,000 lines. I'm describing this. This is the origin of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata was continued all through its history in oral form and accessible. It was made accessible to non-Brahmins as well. Rather, the Brahminical class spread a rumor about the Mahabharata, and some of you might be familiar with that. The rumor is, if you keep the entire text of Mahabharata inside your houses, some kind of calamity will befall on you. Have you heard of this? So nobody likes to get the entire Mahabharata because it is absolute Brahminical canard against allowing Mahabharata to circulate freely in the society. And please believe me, in various parts of India, there are various kinds of Mahabharata. I heard the Billy Mahabharata, in which Arjun is not at all hero. But I'm saying that people oppose the hegemony of Sanskrit in the 6th century before Christ philosophically in Buddhism. They oppose the hegemony of Sanskrit by twisting the traditions, cultural forms around. That is in the 2nd century before Christ, 2,300 years before our time. But if you move forward in its history, say come to the 6th or 7th century, and you find that there is discussion about the forms of Sanskrit prevalent in the country. There is a theory, aesthetic and linguistic theory called Riti Siddhant. And in that the theory says that there isn't one kind of Sanskrit, there's so many regional varieties. So don't think it is homogeneous, it is one. There are as many Sanskrit as there are people in this country. And it is their diversity and variety, that's what lends charm to Sanskrit. So there was someone within the Sanskrit fold who was trying to say that people here matter more than your language tradition, the purity of language tradition. There was similarly a musician called Matanga. He wrote a book called Brahad Deshi, and that's a remarkable book. He composed rather than, when I say write, he composed that book because ancient text and writing and manuscript, and it's a completely different kind of market, different kind of circus. We don't know the exact dates. We don't know whether it was actually written or somebody had copied it or it was dictated, whether a scholiast was writing and the guru was dictating it. In some cases, like, this, you might have heard that the Vyasa's Mahabharata is written down by Ganesha, half human, half elephant. And it is possibly because it was made for hybrid society rather than high society. That might be, yes. Yes. Otherwise, why would an elephant accept a human body at all? It would be an insult to an elephant. I'm joking on my own name, Ganesha. So please, my name is Ganesha, and I'm mightily proud of that. Mightily proud of that. No, elephants are more intelligent than humans. Why will any elephant accept human body? It's just can't. It will be socially very difficult for that elephant. Matanga's Brahad-deshi. He goes around the country. To the extent he knew the country, he actually identifies music tradition of that area. Matang seems to have realized that this fantastic poetry, the 72 meters of the Vedas, and the intonation are captivating. And perhaps he wanted people to be free of that mesmerism of the not rhyme, because Vedas don't have rhymes, but rhythm, mesmerism of rhythm. So Matanga actually goes around the country and figures out the local musical styles. And he brings all of them together. Brahad, desis. In music, you still have desiya rag, perhaps. And we owe it to Matanga's courage. Matang, by the way, is name of a community in Maharashtra, which does work with leather. They're shoemakers. So there is something there for us to think. Who is talking about the Vedic tradition there? Buddha and Mahabharata are two challenges to the Vedic tradition. But there's a third challenge that comes, and that comes in our time. As I said, Vedas made the Varna system as non-negotiable sacred principle for the society. Caste is a different thing. Caste perhaps existed prior to the arrival of the Sanskrit language. Very often we think Varna comes first, then comes caste, which is not the correct historical sequence. Castes were related to professions. So, as I said, after Holocene, people in this part, they had been staying here in the South India. In South India, almost for 45,000 years, humans were there, Homo sapiens. After Holocene, that's about 12,000 years before us, when the climate changes significantly and becomes favorable for human existence. Then people were initially hunter-gatherers, then they became nomadic, pastoralists, then they became agrarians. That's roughly 6,000, 7,000 years before our time, and village structures emerged. In those village structures, those people knew how to cultivate, how to make pots, how to make textile. So obviously there was the makers of textile, the makers of pots, and this is your bronze is already metals, if not iron, but at least some kind of. They were not Neolithic. They were not using only stone tools. They're using metals, gold. They could use. So there are people treating metals, people treating textile, people treating food grains, people treating health of people. Different castes would have emerged. But they were natural. I'm not justifying the caste system. I'm trying to say when and how precisely this becomes an obnoxious social method. But this changes after the Vedic philosophy, where varnas are imposed, a hierarchy is created. Because the Vedic view has this vertical view of the cosmos. Yesterday, while remembering Iqbal, Sare Jahan se अच्छा हिंदुस्तान हमारा, I said, look, he tells us like हम बुलबुले है उसकी ये गुलिस्तान हमारा. I said, you know, this is a garden and this is a tree. We are all like birds sitting here so comfortably. Reminds me of Gita's Urdhvam Moolam Adashakam. Now, in that, there's a description of Ashwatha tree, a large banyan-like tree, where the roots are above. Urdhva is above. Other shakhas are below. Shakhas, not RSS shakhas, the branches of trees below, and the roots are above. This is inverted tree. Everything is tied up with that, the nameless. Of course, very grand, because in Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf there is a striking sentence. He says, the larger the magnitude of a lie, the more credible it becomes. Now, this Varna ashram system, which came to us through that kind of philosophy, was challenged ultimately during the medieval times, beginning around the 8th century, going on till the 18th century. But certainly from the 12th century onwards till the 18th century. And this challenge came from poets, once again language, once again makers of words, who are generally described as bhakti poets. The bhakti poets were not worried about their caste because they belonged. I mean, in Marathi bhakti poetry, there is a potter, there is Gora Kumbhar, there is a chamar, there are weavers. Kabir was a weaver, for instance, but they rebelled against Varna. The bhakti period, the poets of what we call medieval India, the bhakti poets rebelled primarily against Varna. They said, well, there's nothing up there. If there is divinity you want, it is in here. Manchanga to Kathoti mein Ganga. That's Kabir's famous. I mean, why do you go to Ganga and Banaras? You can choose any other city. Banaras came accidentally to me. I had no political intention. Why do you go to, say, Patna? You think of Patna. Why do you go to Ganga? Here is a cobbler who is actually cobbling his leather. He says, if your mind is pure, then you can find the same Ganga in this little pot in which I am cobbling the leather. So, the Bhakti poets was the third challenge for the Vedic philosophy. But it was not challenge for Vedic philosophy as such. It was challenge to the hegemony that a language called Sanskrit had brought in here and stabilized it. You will ask me a question as I speak. And that question is, but Dr. Devi, was everything in Sanskrit so terrible? My answer is, no, not at all. It was a beautiful language. It produced poetry of the highest kind, unparalleled beauty of language you can find. The range of synonyms and antonyms in Sanskrit, matchless. That gives a great semantic flexibility when you're framing your sentences. Sanskrit produces extremely useful knowledge also in many fields, whether it is metallurgy, with architecture, with painting, with, whether it's medicine, all of that. Yet, this simple fact that only some among the people who knew Sanskrit and who had access to the Vedic pronunciation and Vedic words had a special power for no other justification was the problem with that language. Everything else was all right. But here was a class which was a pointless class. It had gained highest supremacy. This is not a question of any particular caste. It is not about Brahmins, but it is about those who in the name of Brahman, actually suppressed people and dominated them. Why do I say suppress people? Because, if you think of Christian missionaries or Muslim, people who wanted to spread their religion or any other religion in the world, Buddhists, Jains, they would actually go out and propagate and say, hey, here is our truth. In this particular variety, it was saying, hey, our truth, only I will know. But you must recognize that I know it. The Upanishads are fascinatingly beautiful. When I read any Upanishad, I must say that I am transposed to another world. I mean, when say Isha Upanishad, Tena Taktena Bunjita, that is, God is everywhere. Learn to enjoy this world without claiming that it is yours. Learn to sacrifice it, and you'll find it far more enjoyable. That's Mahatma Gandhi had said once that if all the books in the world disappear, I would want this book to be there. And if all the verses in it, this is Isha Upanishad, all the verses in it were to go, I want this particular verse to stay. He said it in a Friday lecture in Gujarat Vidyapith, which he had founded. So beautiful language, beautiful poetry, beautiful meters, majestic thoughts, flight of imagination, all of that is desirable. But the Varna system which rode on the back of all this, which actually, if it's a very nicely written advertisement of a bitter pill, would you still eat that pill because the ad is very good? That's the question. And so the challenge to Varna had to be there, which came from Buddhism, which came from oral traditions such as the Mahabharata, because it was made accessible. It was for everybody. And through Bhakti poetry during medieval times. As a result, somebody like Eknath in Marathi said that if Sanskrit is born of gods, it is called Deva Bhasha. Title of this book, Deva Bhasha. Eknath said in the 15th century, if Sanskrit is made by gods, is Marathi made by thieves? And he was challenging that hegemony. If Sanskrit hegemony was challenged in such a way that after 1,000 years, say 1,000 years before our time, nobody is speaking it, and after independence, when there is insistence on making it the national language, the Constituent Assembly does not accept it. And in the census data, it is shown that hardly anybody speaks Sanskrit. The last census is showing 24,000 people who claim Sanskrit as the mother tongue. What happened to Persian? Persian was also a kind of a hegemony. But the nature of that hegemony was different. Every hegemony is not like everybody else. I mean, it's like every hero in theater, in drama, or film, or novel is not like all other heroes, or every beautiful woman is not like all other beautiful women. Everybody has a different nature. Persian's hegemony and India's experience with that language was different. I said yesterday, for those who were not here yesterday, that in the case of Persian, the language came here first and the rule came later. It is not like the case of Sanskrit, these nomadic hordes came from the Eurasian steppe, and they brought with them their language. But in the case of Persian, the language came here first, around the 10th century. Now this Sanskrit disappearing and Persian coming in, they are not interrelated at all. It was not because Persian started coming here that Sanskrit disappeared. That's not the case. There is a different reason for that, which I'll mention very quickly. The empires came later. And a part of the empires, the entire history, a part of it was terrible. And a part of it was likable. It was in 1298 or 99 that Taimur comes here, and he destroyed Delhi in such a way that it took 100 years for Delhi to come back to its original form. It was vast destruction. Similarly, in the 18th century, 1737 to be precise, Shah of Iran attacks India and destroys large parts of India. So, between say the 13th century till the 18th century, the status of Persian fluctuates. Nadir Shah comes, the name Nadir Shah actually strikes fear in the minds of people in Punjab and Haryana and Delhi. This Nadir Shah is the one who took away the Mayur Sinhasan. He broke it. One diamond out of it he took out, which later went to, through his successor, it went to a Raja in Punjab, Dulip Singh, who subsequently gave it to the British. Kohinoor, you know the story. So, Taimur on one side and Nadir Shah on other side bracket something different. Nearly 4 generations after Taimur returns Babur to India. Now Babur belongs to Turkic, Taimur was a Turkic Mongol. Babur belongs to the same stock. Babur was a cross between Genghis Khan and Taimur. On mother side, Babur was related to Genghis Khan, and on father side, he had ascended from Taimur, great grandson. Nearly 120 years later, Babur comes here. The first thing that late Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Shah Jahan, Jahangir, Aurangzeb, you know the names. The first thing they do is to start encouraging literature. Perhaps it's difficult for us to believe now. Babur did not speak Persian. Taimur definitely did not speak Persian. He was Turkic. He spoke language of the Turks. That is, in terms of language, his affinity was the Ottoman Empire rather than the Persian system. We have to think of India as part of Asia for those centuries. India was not an insular India as it is today. It was part of Asia and politically. This Ottoman Empire was dominated by Turkic language, which I mentioned yesterday. And the Persian, what is called Persian system, was a loose federation of Persian kingdoms spread all the way from Iran to China and Central Asia. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all Persian speaking. India became part of that system. The Persian language had scored over the Turkish language because of its innovation of script, and so it became Arabic Persian script. The Mughals used that script. They started commissioning books. they started commissioning translations of so many of our sacred books, such as the Upanishads, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana. They started giving funds to cultural institutions, encouraging poets. We very often hear of Akbar, who had so many Navaratnas and all that in his darbar. This singer, poet, orator, writer. He employed, he himself could not read or write Persian, but he employed Persian writers to write history of his time. The paper had become available by then from the 12th century onwards, and paper was expensive. And actually, in Akbar's times, paper was given as was awarded, sheets of paper awarded to people who wanted to write Persian, but also other languages, other Indian, Bangla for instance. I would like to mention here that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, as he is called in Maharashtra, but when one speaks in the Indian context, one simply says Shivaji. So, do you mind my calling him Shivaji? I hope nobody feels offended. I have great respect for this extraordinary genius, military genius, and a great administrator and a great human being. Person with absolutely pure character. He wrote letters to Aurangzeb. Those letters are published. They are available now. In fact, Comrade Pansare was killed in Kolhapur because he had published Shivaji's letters to Aurangzeb as appendix to one of his books titled Shivaji Kaun Hota? Who was Shivaji? One of the letters, incidentally, the letters were written in the Persian language. In that, in one of those letters, Shivaji writes to Aurangzeb, saying that your grandfather, that means Akbar, respected all religions, and therefore he was called by people of all religions as Jaga Guru. He did not use the term Vishwaguru. Jagat Guru. I mean, it's very moving. But Shivaji then says, but you are not willing to behave like him, and therefore I must oppose you. The message is one thing. It speaks volumes about who Akbar was. But the form of the message was the Persian language. Persian became the national language for us. Did it become national language in the south? The answer is it became language of administration and language of scholarship in Bengal, in Gujarat, in Sindh, and what is now Pakistan, of course, that is Punjab. In fact, the Punjabi language uses the very same script. It uses now Gurumukhi, but it was it became language of parts of Karnataka, like Gulbarga, and of course Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. It is not as if it was also Persian was used in Kerala and coastal areas. It is not like every square inch of India was covered by Persian. And in the past, it is not like every square inch of India was covered by Sanskrit. That's not the case. Persian was not fought. The Persian hegemony was not fought or countered by people in India. It was brought to an end by an official order of the British in 1837. There is an official act. 1837 is a remarkable year because 1837 follows soon after 1835. I mean, I didn't say much. This is not a very wise statement. Until I mentioned that in 1835, Macaulay's minutes were written, bringing in English as the language of knowledge transactions in India. And in 2 years' time, actually 18 months' time, Persian was banned in India. Persian was removed from all administration in Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras presidencies. So, Persian brought thousands and thousands of words to Indian languages, which already had imbibed thousands and thousands of words from Sanskrit. Did Persian come to an end in India after this official order? I wish I could say no, but the truth is exact opposite. In 40 years' time, after 1837 till 1877, in 40 years' time, more than 90% of the colleges and high schools that used to teach Persian had stopped teaching Persian. After 1857, when the new universities, for the first universities in India came up, Chennai, there's Madras, Calcutta, Calcutta, which is the current name? Kolkata. What should I say? I said Calcutta? Okay. Yeah, 1857 it was Calcutta. Calcutta, Mumbai, Bombay, Calcutta, Madras. Universities came up and they made English as the medium of education. Wait, I'm not saying colleges, I'm only saying high schools, because those universities were created to conduct high school examinations. They did not teach at that time. Those universities were to supervise conduct of high schools. That was they were regulatory bodies in 1858, and they made English as the medium for high school education. And with that, children had to study English and either Sanskrit or Persian. That also divided that left our society deeply divided, which earlier Hindus spoke Persian. They learned Persian, they wrote Persian. But now, if you're Muslim, you studied Persian. If you're Hindu, you studied Sanskrit. About English hegemony, where do I begin? Let me begin at the most difficult point, and the difficult point is 1600. The year 1600 is when East India Company is established in England at the capital of 5 pounds and 3 shillings. Those people come, a team of 6 persons coming to Surat to set up the first factory. In 1602, they submit an application to Jahangir for giving them trade license. Now, I said it's a difficult point because at that time, they were in Surat. The office was in Surat, East India Company office. The difficulty was the Gujaratis of Surat did not know the English language at that time. They don't know it even today properly. I mean, you go to Surat and you'll know what I'm saying. The English did not know the Gujarati language. So how do they communicate? They engage a translator who knew Persian and some Aramaic. They also engaged translators who knew, Aramaic and Portuguese, and Portuguese knowing English. So I write a letter in Surat. I'm a Gujarati. Forgive me for that. My letter gets translated in Persian because I knew Persian as well as Gujarati. Gets translated in West Asian language. From there it gets translated in Portuguese. From there it gets translated to English. Then comes a reply. This process was so elaborate that it took precisely 16 years for Jahangir to understand what was being asked and grant it. There is, if you go to Ajmer in Rajasthan, there's a lovely palace on the tower, and Jahangir is to stand maybe up above, maybe 3rd floor or 4th floor, and in the courtyard there, in the ring there, this Sir Thomas Roe with hands folded, asking for permission to trade, it was given. Such was the language difficulty for the English people here. This is the year 1600. By 1737, I mentioned earlier, Nadir Shah attacks India. And Nadir Shah's attack on India was dealt a very, very severe crack in the hegemony of Persian in the Indian mind. The sympathy was lost. And it is after that date, of course, 1737 is also the time when Aurangzeb has died and the Mughal Empire is becoming weak, but it was a big empire. How weak can a big empire become? Our democracy is very big, it has become weak, but it will still take some more time before it is finished entirely. Indians wanted to replace the Mughal rulers with some other rulers. And it is then they started having truck with the Dutch, the French, and the English to defeat the local princes. One prince hiring those soldiers. From 1737 to 1757, 20 years, Battle of Plassey, and first legitimate European control of a state emerges in Bengal with the dual system of governance. The arrival of English in India was not because of literary glory, though English literature was brought to the front by the British rulers from the second half of the 19th century. After the ICS examinations, syllabus was framed for Indian students in 1860s. It was made compulsory for them to study English literature, and therefore they started studying people like Carlyle, Thomas Carlyle, heroes in hero worship. Anyway, English literature was accepted in India. It was admired. I learned English literature and I used to teach English literature. I simply love it. And I remember so many poems and passages from novels and sentences from plays. Great literature. But in the case of the domination of English, it was not just the literary beauty of the language that attracted India to England. The English rule, which made language as one of the tools, unlike in the case of Persian, English rule which made language as one of the tools, was accepted by Indians because of the attraction for what we vaguely called modernity. It is English language, English rule that brought, people thought, bringing Western modernity to India. So it was a different kind of hegemony. Has it ended? English language hegemony? In the census of 2011, it has ended. Because 2011 census, English is not listed as a scheduled language in the 8th schedule. I don't know. Though it was made a language of administration together with Hindi, not Sanskrit, but English and Hindi. English to be replaced by Hindi after 15 years, extended to another 15 years, extended to another, extended to yet another, and so on endlessly. In the census of India, the number of speakers of English in 1961, just about 1 lakh or so. In 2011, the precise number of English speakers is about 4 lakhs. 4,50,000 speak English. In terms of number of speakers of languages, in the census data of 2011, the census has gone for a sabbatical for a very long time now. We don't know when it appears. Maybe in 2026 they will begin because the law says, the act says that the first census after 2026 will allow the government to do delimitation, having more. So it might appear in 26 or 27, so that they don't have to wait till 2031 to make delimitation and pushing south to further marginality. English, in the number of speakers of people, does not figure in the first 121 languages. But the global rating, global assessment is that India is the second country in the world in terms of number of English speakers. United States is first. United Kingdom is fifth. So we have two countries we are two countries above England. I don't know why no government has advertised this, that we are better than England in English. It will bring more votes, at least. But laughter apart, the medieval times produced out of this fantastically beautiful language Persian a new challenge to the Vedas in terms of bhakti poetry, which sung the virtue of love and compassion and human values. It spread all over the country, from the south, beginning in Shaivite groups, also from Kashmir, beginning Nath Sampradaya, and in central India with Mira Kabir that I mentioned, and in Gujarat, Narsi Mehta, Shankar Dev in Assam, Chaitanya, Krishna, Chaitanya Prabhu in Bengal. Extraordinary. Almost the timing is identical as in Europe, the rise of Protestant faith against traditional Christianity. The same time, some kind of religious rebellion is happening. There it resulted into a renaissance in arts. Here it resulted in a fluorescence of compassion and human sympathy. That comes right down to the times of Tagore and Gandhi. In my opinion, Tagore and Gandhi are the last generation of the Bhakti poets. Gandhi actually said in his prayers, Ishwara Allah Tere Naam. And he drew his prayers from Narsi Mehta, 15th century Gujarati Bhakti poet. The challenge dealt to Vedic Varnashram system comes to a fruition in the teachings of Ambedkar. Not just in annihilation of caste, but Dr. Ambedkar was a great scholar of Sanskrit language. He wrote at least 4 books with remarkable analysis of ancient India. One is who are the Shudras, who the Shudras were. Another is revolution and counter-revolution. Third is enigma of Hinduism or Hindus. Ambedkar, Tagore translated Kabir, and he was very proud of that. 100 songs of Kabir. Tagore, Gandhi, Ambedkar. These are the people who challenge the hegemony of Sanskrit, of Gandhi accepted Bhakti poetry tradition, but he challenged violence brought by Nadir Shah or Taimur. So the ugly face of Persian hegemony was challenged. The beautiful face was kept. Tagore, Ambedkar, Gandhi, they also gave us a complete idea of what a nation should be. And I shall be talking about what is our nationalism. That idea of nation emerges out of how Indians coped with these 3 hegemonies. Through multilingualism, through diversity, through compassion, and through viveka, through scrupulous, logical approach to reality, a realism of Indian brand. We'll talk about that tomorrow. My promise was to speak on the hegemony of these three languages. It's remarkable how India has faced language hegemony rather than some other hegemony, one after the other. We are in for a fourth one, but wait till tomorrow for me to disclose who the villain is. Because it may not be the one that you thought is the villain, it might be something else. So wait for that. But India learned a method of dealing with hegemony, and that method is when Sanskrit was ruling us, other Indian languages survived. The Prakrit survived, the Upper Brahma survived, the Dravidic languages survived. When Persian came here, our languages found a new courage and a new shine. And actually they took shape, Marathi, Hindi, Bangla I mentioned, and many others. When the English came here and was imposed on us, most of our languages developed some of their best literary works precisely during that time, in novel and poetry and theater and cinema, and including folk forms of literature, new expressions. India expressed in many tongues in order to challenge every given hegemony, and the many-tongued India, not just a manly India or a womanly India, not just an aggressor fighting an aggressor or somebody submitting to it. It is the Ardhanari Nateshwar, man and woman together, who symbolizes India, the perfect India. That's in us. Tomorrow, I'll talk about nationalism and the language question, and technology and the language question. And that will complete my Purana. Thank you.
You situate the revolt of the Bhakti poets more or less in the 12th century onwards in the medieval period. But you mentioned the Shaivites, and that goes back further in the Tamil and Kannada traditions. So I was wondering if you could address that. What was the influence of the South in some of this revolt?
The general title of the series I chose was Hegemony, Revolt and Selfhood. And I need to describe what our selfhood is really. While describing that, I am not going to say Sanskrit is a foreign language or Persian is a foreign language or English is a foreign language. They're very much us. But there is something more, and that's where you are. Is in the South. Most of the impulses for determining selfhood arise in the South. A good history of the South has still not been written. It needs to be written. But this is not to make you feel nice. Because I love my Himalayas and my Kerala equally. In fact, I love Afghanistan, I love Kazakhstan tremendously. I love China, and I love every country neighboring us. You name the countries neighboring us, and I love all of them. But selfhood is something different. And selfhood is not where you are born. Selfhood is not what your parents have been. Selfhood is also not your caste or your religion. Selfhood is how you look at the space and the time surrounding you, how your consciousness functions, how it grasps what we think is reality. Does only an individual have that idea of self, or do groups of people have an idea of self? And in my opinion, imagine a local train in Bombay or metro train in Bangalore where people climb, people get in, people get out, but the trainedness of the train remains there. A group is not just a simple addition of individual members, but it has its independent life. And that independent life of all of us is our self. The best reflection of that self is in the Constitution of India. Do you know something? I mean, you obviously know it, but when I ask this kind of, do you know something? You should know that I have something very exciting to tell you, which you had forgotten. So I'll repeat. Do you know something? The Constitution of India says, in no uncertain words, India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. And how are the states made in India? They're linguistic states. We are, if we are Indians, we are a union of languages. That's what the Constitution of India says. And I don't think there has been a better historian of India than that particular sentence. That sentence sums up the entire history of India. We are a union of languages. We received languages. We received even aggressors' languages and Indianized them. And we have enriched them. There was a time in India when the book production in India in the Persian language was more than book production of Persian languages in Iran, that is Persia. Today, the English books, we publish 90,000 books a year in English. England publishes about 250,000 books. We're in 2025. Wait till 2050. I'm not talking of 2047. That's, let somebody else do that. Let everybody be happy. Sarve sukhanu bhavanti. The 2050, India would be producing more books in English than England does, just as there are more English speakers in India than there are in England. Because it's not because we love the English language or we love the Persian language, we love languages. We think of humans as a linguistic animal, not just as a social animal. We can be antisocial and be even more linguistic. So Rousseau's definition of people, society, is different. We are a linguistic people. We like to talk. And despite this, that machine which you have, which is trying to silence us, India shall speak, and speak more languages. This time I'm serious when I say, do you know? Do you know what? The last time the census was held, the list of mother tongues said, the census said they had, they go from door to door and ask, what is your language? They got 19,500 names of what people call languages. But then they sat down and decided how many of these are real languages. Some people give apna hi naam dete hain. They say, Ganesh is my language, so that my name gets recorded in historical records. So they found that 1,369 languages. And believe me, when I went out with a group of 3,000 people to count, we did linguistic survey of India, we found 760 living languages, which means I have heard with my ears 760 languages. I have spoken to those people. We are an amazing linguistic diversity, and actually, our only security against any invasion is our linguistic diversity. Now, this is not a pragmatic view. You will say somebody comes and throws bombs on you. I understand all that. But any cultural invasion we can counter through our linguistic diversity. So long as linguistic diversity is here, no kind of hegemony can suppress us, short or long hegemony. And if somebody tries to make us monolinguistic, take it from me, that is the guarantee for the failure of such a regime. Thank you. Yes, I have far exceeded.
I read somewhere, I can't vouch for its factual correctness, that Western civilization developed partly on account of three factors. One was translation from classical languages to everybody's language, like Bible from Greek and Hebrew being translated to English. Second is printing, which made all these texts available on a wide scale for everybody to read. And it was encouraged. And the third was a kind of an intellectual atmosphere where you could question everything, coming down from the days of the Greeks. So in the light, whether this is true or not, how do you view our performance over the years? Firstly, in the field of education, spreading language to people. Secondly, the growth of language, the language itself. The way the language is coped with the intellectual demand, which is brought on the people by all the developments. So language has to grow. So any particular ideas on these two?
Thank you. I mean, I agree with that, the authority that you quote. Indeed, after the fall of Constantinople, the European Renaissance began, primarily because Arabic books went to England, Greek books went to England, and not just England, but everywhere in Europe, France, Western Europe. And that gave a new impetus to sciences, thought, philosophy. So translation, of course, with translation they were a little strict, because when Aitenon Dolet, the French translator, translated a book wrongly, they put him to guillotine. So that was a risk. So translations were, and even today, the European mind thinks of translation as a secondary product. Literary work is one, translation is secondary. In India, sir, in the Indian language, modern Indian languages, you go to the genesis, the source point. In Marathi, the first major book written was a translation of Bhagavad Gita by Jnaneshwar, called Jnaneshwari. In Telugu, it is the Ramayana getting translated. In Kannada, it is the Mahabharata and Ramayana getting translated, except for Tamil. All other, in Gujarati, which I mentioned with some degree of awkwardness, but now with pride, Hemachandracharya of 11th century did a Desi Namamala. That is, he prepared a dictionary for translators, listing several thousand words, Sanskrit and Gujarati, for dictionary for translators. He was a Jain, he belonged to the Jain tradition, and was thinking of how the Jain knowledge can be carried forward, Desi Namamala. Translation is, in the case of most languages, for us, the first literary work, not the second, not the secondary. In fact, we have, if I may be permitted to say so, a translating consciousness. I mean, think of simple life example. When I was a student in England, if somebody spoke a language other than English in a train or a bus, everybody, I mean, they normally used to hide their faces behind a newspaper which they were not reading, but suddenly they became very conscious. But here you go, now of course nobody travels in a bus or a train, but I believe, but you go to a public, and if you hear 5, 6, 7 different languages, you don't feel self-conscious. The language, the other language tolerance level that we have is relatively higher. And therefore we have a translating consciousness. Besides, our metaphysics has pumped it in our heads and hearts so much that after this life there will be another life. We'll translate from here to another life and so on. So in that, on that parameter, I will score Indians better. Indian translation activity is also much higher now than it used to be before. It is the question of question. That is where all of us need to bend our heads and look down. question was killed here. Though there is an Upanishad called Prashnopanishad, questioning is considered a crime. A guru says, this is knowledge, Shishya has to accept it. If you question a guru's knowledge, then it's a crime. And that has been a fatal blow to the development of curiosity and our grasp of the world. People compensated that by becoming inward looking. Constantly they're looking at their Atman. So that if they find that, next life will be better. I mean, forget this life. Incidentally, you happen to be here in this caste, in this position. Next life, you want mukti, moksha. Look inward. That's a philosophical quality and I value it. But questioning has taken a big beating here. Our children in schools are not able to formulate questions properly. And nobody is able to answer them, me included perhaps, in answering the questions properly. I hope that was a proper answer to your question. Thank you.
Hello? No. Question. So there is this neuroscientist based in the US. He does research on the neuroscience of religions, right? And one of the insights that he's had is there is almost a 30 to 40% lower incidence of depression and anxiety for people who believe in God, right? People who believe in God and has some belief system, right? Now, from there, when we look at the common consciousness of the Indian and almost everything emerging out of these Sanskrit traditions and the Varna system being one key element of it, some people are assigned thus in the system a second-class status in front of God. Now, like you said, in hegemonies. Now, this is, in a way, can it be termed as a spiritual oppression? That God's been taken away from you and somebody has rights over God to you. And if we've evolved with God and we need some form of God and there is this one God that is greater than every other God, then is spiritual option, sorry.
Very, very good question. Without any offense meant to believers. So I am a believer, but I don't want to offend any believer. Let me state that God emerges as an idea after humans acquired language. Before having language, it was impossible for them to think of anything like God. There are other species on this earth, and we don't know what are the levels of anxiety among sheep. Dogs have and cats have anxiety when their friends go out of, like I am a friend with a dog. I go out, the dog has anxiety, that I know. But we have not measured the level of anxiety among birds and fish and animals and humans. The idea of God can reduce anxiety, but in place of God, if somebody believes in mother or elder brother or elder sister or younger brother or somebody believes that in just about anything, there are people who have these bands with lots of gems. Somebody's told them that if you wear a blue one, what is it called? Blue stone, sapphire, half your worries will go. Now you should go to the share market in Dalal Street, Bombay to see how many things take away anxiety. I mean, they have fantastic things on their fingers, their necks, their ear, their hair. They must wear the shirt of a special color in order to have reduce. Go to a cricket match and look at the fans and how they lose anxiety by believing in something. Now, belief is, of course, a temporary postponement of your responsibility. It eventually catches up with you. Thank you. But why do you need an American neuroscientist to tell about God? Uh, if there were no anxiety, there would be no neuroscience. Please tell him. I mean, he'll go in big deficit if he spreads these ideas. Thank you. You should read Freud on God. God is a visualization of the fear that the child has about her or his father. That's Freudian. I don't agree with Freud, but that's how he has agreed. Can I say, whatever comes handy to you in that situation is good, God or no God. Albert Camus, in the novel called Plague, has depicted clergy who say God is angry with you. In fact, some minister here said that God is angry, therefore Corona came. Another minister said, actually, please God by, tali baja ke, it will go away. Belief is always irrational. But should people have irrationality or no irrationality? The answer is they must have irrationality, because only rationality can make humans monstrous. People who analyze nuclear wars and atomic wars have come to the conclusion that heightened status of only reason has led to more deaths of more destruction, genocide in society. There's Ashish Nandi, ask Ashish Nandi. He'll give a precise figure how many people got killed because of R capital reason. Either way, humans are a bad animal. Either imaginative or reasonable, they destroy each other, kill each other. I think when God helps you to be a nice person, invite God. When God lets you down from becoming a nice person, send God on some holiday till next week. Thank you. Be a good human being. God or no God. God will like that. That's what I'm told.
Hi, I'm Ganesh.
Now, you're addressing to the elephant in me or human in me?
No. I'm 21st century one. So my first question is, okay. Every year, generally, the students who write English exam in boards and universities are more than lakhs. And across the period, if you look at Indian population, it might be in crores. So my question is, what was the criteria in the survey to consider you are an English speaker? And part of the same following question was, why do we, the number was reduced, and what do they achieve from it, and what was the purpose, and who will benefit from this?
See, we have electoral democracy. That is, people go to the Lok Sabha, they get elected out through constituencies. Hindi-speaking area has a certain number of MPs. If the census shows that the number of Hindi speakers has started going down, then it will affect the strength of MPs in the parliament. Actually, the Hindi language numbers were shown at 52 crores in 2011. But the real number was 38 crores. They had added 14 crore other language speakers to Hindi language. And if you should actually look at it is there, you'll find it in, accessible to everybody, language census. Bhojpuri was claimed by 5 crore, 4 lakh persons. Bhojpuri is pushed into Hindi. All languages of Himachal Pradesh, all languages of Uttarakhand, all languages of Rajasthan, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, of course, is Hindi speaking, but border areas of Madhya Pradesh don't speak Hindi. All languages of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand are pushed into Hindi. Also, there is a language called Paura, is spoken in Maharashtra by tribals, but is also spoken by a few tribals in Madhya Pradesh. Therefore, it features in Madhya Pradesh list. They put Pauri language of the Paura people, in Hindi. But Paura people don't understand Hindi. they're shown as Hindi speakers. So some figures of some languages are doctored and shown as larger, figures of other languages. So in 2011 census, the only 3 languages where the number of speakers increase much higher than speakers of other languages in comparison to 2001 census, decadal comparison. 3 languages got increase, higher increase: Hindi, Sanskrit, and Gujarati. Do you want me to answer that question any further? I mean, it is sad. The census is coming around, and the right of Kutchi people to be counted, right of Tulu people to be counted. There must be some Tulu speakers here. They have a right to be counted. Banjaras, there's 60 lakh Banjaras in the country. They speak Gormati, language called Gormati. Gormati is not listed in the census at all as a language spoken in India. 60 lakh people are denied linguistic citizenship. Story is over. But they are shown 24,000 Sanskrit speakers. Gormati is the language which connected India with Europe. India was connected with Asia during the Persian system. In those years, people from Rajasthan went through Punjab, then to Afghanistan, then to Syria, then to Europe, and ended up in Hungary and such countries. They're there. The Romas are the same as the Banjaras. They speak the same language called Mati or Gormati. It is not listed in the census. Census is your question. People believe in the census. So it's godlike. And do we know whether the years of the census are shorter or longer than what they should? We don't know. We accept census is a census is sense. Whatever the census says is truth. We accept it. We lap it up. Go ahead. But hegemonies are fought by linguistic diversities in this country. And invariably they will do so. That's the miracle called India. Thank you.
On that note, I'd like to thank Professor Devi for day 2 of the lecture. Quite a few of Professor Devi's publications are available outside. If you haven't picked up a copy, please do. He will be signing after. You want to say something? Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Tomorrow will be the last lecture in this series, and it will be my last lecture in Bangalore and Karnataka. I'm not speaking again. I'm 75, and I believe that people who become 75 should take a back seat. I mean, allow me for myself. I'm not saying anybody else. But yes, so I have decided that I will withdraw myself from public space. So tomorrow will be my last lecture. And therefore I'm going to cry a lot. So don't attend it. Thank you.
Tomorrow we will be discussing language between nationalism and technology, so please do come back. Thank you once again, Professor Devi, and thanks to all of you for being here.